So it's 2024. Congratulations. Happy New Year. We made it. Wow, what a year 2023 is. But now that we're on the other side, there's a lot of people, a lot of clients, a lot of talk in the media. What's going to happen in the Toronto real estate market in 2024? So the great irony is in life, and especially when it comes to Toronto real estate, is people generally have the tendency to overcomplicate things. And the short answer is that it's all really just about interest rates. Everything else right now is going to be noise. So we're going to take a look at today where we expect interest rates to land by the end of the year and how we expect the market to behave in 2024 and some things to watch right now that no one is really talking about that are quite interesting. My name is Ralph Fox, and I am the co-founder and broker of record with Fox, Marin Associates. We are one of Toronto's most innovative and active real estate brokerages in central and downtown Toronto. If you like this content, please be sure to hit the like button or subscribe button. And if you have any constructive comments or feedback, we would absolutely love to hear from you. Okay, so this is going to be a lot of fun. We're going to talk about interest rates. It feels like that was the theme of this channel in 2023, but it will continue to be so for some period until it no longer is the major driver, a factor in what's driving the Toronto real estate market. So in a time like this where we have maximum fear and uncertainty as we did in 2023 and going into 2024, everybody really tends to panic and everybody tends to move from one headline to another headline and from, this massive spiraling of doom scrolling. But the important thing is really to zoom out and take a look at things and see them objectively and unemotionally. And there's a couple real interesting things. So if you just look at the last couple of years, you zoom back, and what you'll see the Bank of Canada, of course, has raised interest rates by 500 basis points in a very, very short period of time. And all of the pundits and experts and doomsayers who are out there, calling for the housing Armageddon, it never happened. And the Toronto real estate market actually performed incredibly well with a tremendous amount of resiliency given what was thrown at it in the last year to year and a half. And at this point, it's pretty safe to say that we are on the other side. And a lot of this Armageddon that people have been calling for, simply, it's just not going to happen. So number one, the market has been incredibly resilient over the last couple of years and has definitely borne the brunt of the storm that was thrown at it. And it starts to seem like right now that we are approaching the other side of the storm. And the second thing is I just ask people to sort of zoom out even further and look, at a 40-year history. And essentially I would go back to, a real pinnacle in macroeconomics, which was in 1971 when the US pulled away from the gold reserve, and all of a sudden the US dollar became a free floating fiat currency. And once the US had control of the reserve currency, they could manipulate their economy and they could manipulate the world's economy in ways that they hadn't been able to prior to 1971. And so this created cycles where we had monetary expansion and we had monetary contraction. And we've seen this happen 7 or 8 times since 1971, where we would have a tremendous amount of easing going into the economy. And then that would then start to overheat the economy, cause inflation, and then interest rates would rise, pulling the inflation back down. So we would have these periods of expansion and contraction. Some were deeper than others. Of course, in the 80s, we saw interest rates shoot up to 18 or even as high as 21%, I believe. So, debts weren't as high then as they are today. And so relative to the movement we've seen, it may even be more aggressive than what happened in the 80s. So really interesting to just remember that this is just part of a cycle. And any expert that you listen to, if you listen to the banks talking, basically everybody really, really says that we are at the end of this cycle. And even if you read between the lines of what the Bank of Canada is saying, of course, they're trying to cover all their bases and say they're going to keep the door open to raising rates if need be. But it's really all but a foregone conclusion that we are now at the other side of this. And it's not really a question of if rates are going to go down. It's really just a question of when that's going to happen in 2024. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. So here are some facts to keep in mind, which will really give a good indication of what has transpired over the last 2 years. But more importantly, they'll lend into how things could play out in 2024 and even stretching out into 2025. So what's really interesting is that 55% of all mortgages that are out there have not yet seen an increase in their monthly payments in this new interest rate environment. Now, in 2024, we have about 1.1 million new mortgages coming up for renewal, and we have about the same in 2025. So we're looking at about 2 million mortgages that are out there that are going to be renewing. So what does this mean for 2024 and 2025? Now, it's important to look at what happened in the 2022 and 2023, where we look at those 45% of all mortgages that are out there that have seen an increase in payments. And what we see when we look at the real estate market is that we see that defaults remain still at all-time lows and power of sales just really aren't out there and they're not happening. So in spite of this 500 basis point increase in interest rates, surprisingly to everybody, in 2023, last year, we had 20-year lows in both inventory and sales. And this is something that absolutely no one was predicting. Just nobody is selling and everybody is trying to hold on to their real estate. So what does this tell you? Well, banks are working with their clients and they're extending out amortizations and they're not forcing sales. They don't want to become owners of last resort and then having to sell properties. And so they're working with the homeowners, they're working with investors, and there's no doubt that this is going to continue into 2024 and 2025. Number two, it's really important to understand that just like in 2022 and 2023, people are going to be able to continue to refinance their properties and hold onto their assets in most cases. But what will happen is that they will contract elsewhere. So most homeowners and most landlords or investors realize that over the long term, if they see through this storm, their properties will continue to be worth a lot more than they are at today. And so they're going to cut back elsewhere and they're not going to go out for dinner or they're not going to go to the movies or they're not going to buy the next iPad that comes out, but they're going to hang on to their real estate and the banks are going to work with them. So what that means is that we have a lot of spending, discretionary spending, that could be cut back. And this is really concerning because our economy, in my opinion, is a lot weaker than people are talking about, and certainly the media is discussing right now. And this goes into point three, where if you look at the actual economy, our GDP is contracting, but our GDP is very much being masked by our GDP per capita, which has been contracting now for 7 straight quarters, which really indicates that Canadians as a whole are getting poorer. And our GDP, which has been pretty okay up until the last few quarters, has really been masked by this population growth. But when you look at the population itself, we're continuing to get poorer, not richer. And if you look at the job market, it's really weakening. I read somewhere that in December, we added 100 part-time jobs to our economy, but we added 72,000 or something like that, new Canadians all here looking for work. So our economy is very fragile. And I really think that the Bank of Canada, regardless of what they're saying, fundamentally understands that there is a massive contraction that's going to be happening with consumer spending, which has always been the bulwark of our economy and confidence, but that really could see the market the economy start to spiral very quickly. And that's why you're seeing CIBC and Benjamin Tal talking about 150 to 200 basis points reduction in the overnight lending rate as a response to trying to adjust to what we're starting to see in the economy. And this is something else. This is our number 4 point here. But when you talk about inflation, it's really important to understand. This is something that I have just been screaming about over the course of, the last 6 months, is when you look at the inflation numbers, if you take out the cost of housing, meaning the cost to borrow, which is a huge percentage of the way they calculate inflation actually now is at 1.9%. And that is below the Bank of Canada target rate. And if you did the same prior to COVID in 2019, we would have been at about 2.1%. So inflation is down. The economy is very, very weak. And we have a lot of mortgages that are going to turn over. And if they're at these current rates, discretionary spending is going to dramatically pull back. And all of this really is a doomsday scenario for the economy. And I just can't foresee like a lot of others who are looking at the Bank of Canada right now, despite whatever they're saying, I just can't foresee anything but significant reduction in interest rates happening in 2024. And then lastly, it's really important to talk about the US to the south. It's really important to know that there's an election coming up in 2024. If you look, even though the Fed is supposed to be just like the Bank of Canada, independent from political overreach and oversight, very much they're impacted by it. And if you look at most election cycles, usually in the United States, interest rates generally tend to be at the lower point of the cycle during election years. And I think, there's a lot of speculation out there with Powell, Chairman Powell, who runs the Fed, that he is going to be shifting and pivoting in order to help support Biden, because there's no sitting president that could ever win in the middle of a deep recession. And we'll see how all of this plays out. But I think when you add all of these factors together, what's happening and going to happen in the US, inflation, the weakness in our economy, when you look at just what banks are willing to do to help people stay in their homes, and the actual challenge that the Bank of Canada is going to have with this tremendous reduction in consumer confidence and spending at these rates, I think it's a foregone conclusion that we are looking at significant reduction in rates. It's just really a question of how much and when. My best guess on where interest rates are going to land and where the Toronto real estate market will end up at the end of 2024 are as follows, based on all of the information that we've discussed up until this point in time. So I think the Bank of Canada is really, really, really going to try and hold off reducing rates for as long as possible. A lot of people are calling that they're going to start in April. I think they're going to try and hold off. I really believe that their credibility has been really hurt on being wrong, basically on almost every single call on the last 2 to 3 years. And so I think they're going to go out of their way to try and protect their credibility. And I think that they are going to be more conservative at the outset in terms of reducing rates. And so I think they're going to try and hold off to the summer. I also know that they have deeply discussed and thought about what happened last year, not too long ago, last January, where they came out and said, we're not even reducing rates, we're just going to pause. And the market literally shot straight up as soon as it got a base level of certainty. So I think they're going to be holding off. But then again, there could be so many different outliers. I mean, by the time that this video is even posted, something could have changed that may force their hand to pivot quicker than I'm anticipating. But it's definitely a shifting landscape, but it's really just a question of when, not if. And so if I'm a betting man, I would think that we're going to see at least 100 basis points lower by the end of 2024 than we are at today. What that means for the Toronto real estate market, and that's a conservative number, by the way, but I think that's reasonable. And I just want to, go into, again, what happened last year is when the Bank of Canada just simply said they were going to pause and gave some certainty to the market shot right back up. And then in June and July, we saw those two increases, small increases of 25 basis points each, and that really put things on ice. But if we get to a scenario where there's certainty in the market, where consumers and buyers who are sitting on the sideline know which way things are going, and they've seen one or two adjustments downwards of 50 basis points, and we get that 5-year back into the mid fours, which is where we were at last year, where the market was shooting straight up, the market is going to respond very favorably to this. And it's the one thing about real estate, especially, is that it's really based on sentiment and it's based on emotionality. And I think once we start to see those rates come down, we will see a lot of that FOMO come back into the market from people sitting in the sidelines. And we can definitely expect a lot of activity to start ramping up once we see the change in the narrative coming from the Bank of Canada. So to start off the year, I think it's going to be tentative and I think it's going to be slow. I think people are going to want to see how things play out. And I think sellers, knowing that they're not going to get the highest and best price for their properties, are going to be holding out as well. So we're in a bit of a standoff until we start to see how things play out. And the inevitability of it is there. It's just a question of when. So, we're thinking that we're going to see at Fox Marin increases in prices of appreciation of somewhere between 4 to 6%, which is slightly going to be below the 30-year or 40-year average, which is at around 7%, but still pretty strong numbers coming off the last couple of years. And we do expect to see a lot more inventory coming to market as well, and a lot more sales more in line with the moving 10-year average at about 85,000 sales, somewhere in that area. But this is really important. Despite the drop in interest rates, overall affordability is still going to remain tight, and it's really not going to change, because as we see those interest rates come down, we will see prices adjusting, probably even at a quicker rate, back up. So lots to think about and break down, but that's how I see things happening. And I think our whole team is very much aligned with how we see 2024 and going into 2025 even playing out. There's a great quote by legendary investor, Fox Marin icon Ray Dalio, who once stated, "He who lives by the crystal ball will eat shattered glass." And if it's something that we have learned since March 2020, just because something hasn't happened in our lifetime doesn't mean it can't happen. So right now, there's a few things out of the US that could significantly impact how things could play out in 2024 that no one is really talking about when they're talking about Toronto real estate. First and foremost, and we touched on this a little earlier, is the US elections. Regardless of where you sit on the political spectrum, I think if you're a rational, objective thinker, there really is no good outcome in this election. And this has a very high probability, best case scenario, of ending up in a lot of civil unrest. And there are some, people out there who think what happened in January 6th could be just a dress rehearsal for what's to come. So, regardless of, the outcome of the election, I think either side could very much end up protesting the results of the election, regardless of who wins. And, if you look at the most important foundation of any democracy, it's the peaceful transition of power. And if that doesn't happen or becomes challenged, it could really put a lot of concerns over a lot of things all at once very, very quickly in November. And so that's something really to keep your eye on as to how things play out. And really, I haven't seen anybody who can give any type of optimistic outcome for this. But, if you're watching the economy and you're watching, when is the best time to make a decision, it's something to keep in mind or in the back of your mind. The other thing, and this is something we've been flagging on this channel for some time, is the U.S. commercial real estate sector, which is just about to get hit with a massive tsunami. You have commercial office buildings with tremendous amounts of vacancies. You have valuations, from 2019 that are, 60, 70% lower, and you have revenues that are down almost equally as much. And what's really important to understand when you're thinking about the commercial real estate sector in the United States is that 80% of these loans are held by regional banks. And as we all know, the regional banks in the US are under a tremendous amount of duress. And so, I think it's going to be very problematic when you have these trillions of dollars in loans coming up that actually nobody even wants to buy, where the valuations are so way off from the prices where they acquired these properties at, that the Fed is going to have to step in, and they're going to have to step in very aggressively. And the problem is that a lot of these flagship office buildings are owned by pension funds. And so there could be a real contagion here if this isn't handled properly. I'm sure this is on the powers that be radar because it's been telegraphed for quite a while. But this is a brewing issue, which is really going to need to be handled really well from the outset. If not, it could cause problems throughout the global economy, and it could definitely be something that you could even be feeling here in Toronto. And then number three, again, going back to the U.S., is they could get dragged into a significant war somewhere in the Middle East or maybe even Taiwan. But it definitely seems and feels like tensions are escalating and things seem to be moving very, very quickly, not even considering about what's happening currently in the Ukraine, which is just an absolute heartbreak and disaster. So hopefully none of these events that we're talking about will come about or will impact anyone or anything in a major way. but there's a lot that's out there right now. And it's something when you're trying to figure out how to make a move to keep your eye on. But again, it's one of the things, that I always talk about on this channel and we talk about to our clients is as well, there are a lot of black swan events that are out there. And there are a lot of things that could, create reasons not to buy or not to want to even own Toronto real estate. We still believe in the long-term opportunity in owning Toronto real estate. And if anything that we've seen in the last few years or even decades is our market has tremendous fundamentals and incredible resiliency, and it will overcome pretty much anything at this point that's thrown at it. It's impossible to time the market equally as well, but at the same time, we should keep our eye on things that are happening around us. And definitely there could be a lot of headwinds coming out of the US into the global economy as a result of what could be happening. So something to keep your eye on, definitely food for thought. Thank you for tuning in. Once again, my name is Ralph Fox. And if you find the content on this channel interesting, informative, or helpful, please be sure to hit that subscribe button or click that like button. And if you have any comments, we would absolutely love to hear from you. Thanks so much for watching.